Seeking Wisdom, Week 35, The Strength of Belief. The books of Maccabees 1 and 2. This week we will begin our lesson with some of the background history of the books. The book of Maccabees recounts the conflict between the Jewish religion and the Greek culture, a culture that was a great influence in the Near East after Alexander the Great died in 323 BC. It was after Alexander's death that his empire split in two, Ptolemy in Egypt and the Seleucids in Syria, and under the rule of Seleucids, the Greek culture became dominant. While the Greek culture was being accepted, the Jewish society was in turmoil. Some of the Jews accepted Hellenistic tendencies, and some strongly opposed it because of the loss of parts of Judaism. This conflict led to a civil war and escalated under the rule of King Antiochus IV. In 169, Antiochus plundered valuables from the Temple of Jerusalem, forbade Jewish practices, and erected an altar to worship Zeus in the temple. When we read the book of Maccabees, we meet the Maccabean brothers, and it shows us why they are main influences in the story by the end of chapter 2. In the first book of Maccabees is a story of the family that resisted the Greek influence and decided to fight back. The battle began with Matthias leading the charge, and after his death, Judas stepped up and continued the fight. Judas was very successful and won many battles. Even though he was fighting side battles with Alcimus, the high priest, he was able to purify the temple in 164. Judas, who died in battle, was succeeded by Jonathan, who was eventually appointed high priest by King Alexander Epiphanes and was able to reclaim the ancient lands that belonged to David and Solomon. Jonathan later died at the hand of Trypho, and Simon was next in line to lead the charge. Simon, who not only became high priest, also became governor of Judea beginning in 142 BCE. At this time, the Jews enjoyed a short period of independence, from 142 to 63 BC, a period also known as the Hasmonean Kingdom. According to the historian Joseph, the name Hasmonean was derived from Matthias' father's name, Hasmones. The reprieve for the Jews didn't last long because in 63 BC, the Roman Republic under the rule of Pompey the Great surrounds and takes control of the city, which marks the beginning of Roman colonial rule. Pompey had control of the city and entered the temple, but left the treasure completely intact. The theology behind the books of Maccabees should be broken down into a couple different topics. In the first book of Maccabees, the theology looks mainly at covenants. It is in this book that people are asked to keep the laws of God, and when they refuse to do this, they are punished. Those who disobeyed the law were considered perpetrators of the suffering and loss endured by the people under the Greek rule. Maccabee 1 also stresses the cruel policies Greece adhered to in order to invade the land the Jews occupied and prohibited them from practicing their religion. One of the great contributions of the Maccabees was the restoration of the temple, and this event is still commemorated annually on the Hanukkah feast. The Maccabeans were considered loyalists of the law, but at times felt it was necessary to bend the rules and do things a little differently to suit the situation. However, when we consider the victory and success that the Jews had at this time, it must be once again attributed to God's grace and fidelity, not the strength of man. The theology behind the second book of Maccabees is more focused on praying for the dead, resurrection, and judgment day. This book focuses on the events in the temple, when it was attacked and offended, then cleansed, and finally when it was rebuilt, only to be once again attacked by Antiochus IV and his son. The story of the temple recreates what happens to the Jewish people at that time: persecution, liberation, and reconstruction. Maccabees 2 focuses mainly on the Jewish community at a time when certain individuals, including high priests, introduced the pagan culture of Greece into the country, into Jerusalem, and into the temple. The pagan culture is not compatible with genuine Jewish practice, and these sins led to God's punishment. In this book, the author is stating the obvious. Sin leads to punishment, and conversion leads to salvation. Chapter 12 of Maccabees 2 is the highlight of the book. This is where we first find evidence of prayer and penance offerings for the dead in the Old Testament. After the Sabbath, Judas prepared a funeral for those killed in action, and in the battle clothes of the dead are found sacred tokens of the idols of Jamnia, which the law forbids the Jews to wear. Perhaps those found with the tokens assumed it would bring them good luck, but perhaps it was punishment for their sin that caused their death. The survivors must use this as a reminder that these sins are not acceptable, and they must pray to God to wash away their sins. Judas then took up a collection and sent it to Jerusalem to offer as a sacrifice for their sins, which the author explains as a belief and hope of resurrection. This is where the biblical foundation of the practice of praying for the dead originated. The Catholic Church advises her children to celebrate Mass, to do charitable acts, and to offer prayer to those who have passed away. As St. John Chrysostom said, "Do not hesitate to help and pray for those who have passed away." We conclude this lesson with the story of the martyrdom of the 7 brothers in chapter 7 of Maccabees 2. This entire account shows us that the observance of the law is more important than life itself. It happened also that 7 brothers and their mother were arrested and were being compelled by the king under torture with whips and thongs to partake of unlawful swine's flesh. One of them, acting as their spokesman, said, "What do you intend to ask and learn from us? For we are ready to die rather than transgress the laws of our ancestors." The king fell into a rage and gave orders to have pans and cauldrons heated. These were heated immediately, and he commanded that the tongue of their spokesman be cut out and that they scalp him and cut off his hands and feet, while the rest of the brothers and the mother looked on. When he was utterly helpless, the king ordered them to take him to the fire, still breathing, and to fry him in a pan. The smoke from the pan spread widely, but the brothers and their mother encouraged one another to die nobly. After the first brother had died in this way, they brought forward the second for their sport. They tore off the skin of his head with the hair and asked him, "Will you eat rather than have your body punished limb by limb?" He replied in the language of his ancestors and said to them, "No." Therefore he in turn underwent tortures as the first brother had done, and when he was at his last breath, he said, "You accursed wretch, you dismiss us from this present life, but the King of the universe will raise us up to an everlasting renewal of life, because we have died for his laws." After him, the third was a victim of their sport. When it was demanded, he quickly put out his tongue and courageously stretched forth his hands and said nobly, "I got these from heaven, and because of his laws I disdain them, and from him I hope to get them back again." As a result, the king himself and those with him were astonished at the young man's spirit, for he regarded his sufferings as nothing. After he too had died, they maltreated and tortured the fourth in the same way. When he was near death, he said, "One cannot but choose to die at the hands of mortals, and to cherish the hope God gives us being raised again by him. But for you, there will be no resurrection to life." Next, they brought forward the fifth and maltreated him. But he looked at the king and said, "Because you have authority among mortals, though you also are mortal, you do what you please. But do not think that God has forsaken our people. Keep on, and see how his mighty power will torture you and your descendants." After him they brought forward the sixth, and when he was about to die, he said, "Do not deceive yourself in vain, for we are suffering these things on our own account, because of our sins against our own God. Therefore, astounding things have happened. But do not think that you will go unpunished for having tried to fight against God." The mother was especially admirable and worthy of honorable memory. Although she saw her 7 sons perish within a single day, she bore it with good courage because of her hope in the Lord. She encouraged each of them in the language of their ancestors, Filled with a noble spirit, she reinforced her woman's reasoning with a man's courage and said to them, "I do not know how you came into being in my womb. It was not I who gave you life and breath. It was not I who gave you life and breath, nor I who set in order the elements within each of you. Therefore the Creator of the world, who shaped the beginning of humankind and devised the origin of all things, will in his mercy give life and breath back to you again, since you now forget yourselves for the sake of his laws." She continues, "My son, have pity on me. I carried you 9 months in my womb and nursed you for 3 years, and have reared you and brought you up to this point in your life, and have taken care of you. I beg you, my child, to look at the heaven and the earth and see everything that is in them, and recognize that God did not make them out of things that existed. And in the same way the human race came into being. Do not fear this butcher, but prove worthy of your brothers. Accept death, so that in God's mercy I may get you back again along with your brothers." While she was still speaking, the young man said to the king, "But you, unholy wretch, you most defiled of all mortals, do not be elated in vain and puffed up by uncertain hopes when you raise your hand against the children of heaven. You have not yet escaped the judgment of the Almighty, all-seeing God." The king fell into a rage and handled him worse than the others, being exasperated at his scorn, so he died in his integrity, putting his whole trust in the Lord. Last of all, the mother died after her sons. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this week's lesson. Please join us next Friday for our new video. The answers to this week's questions will be revealed in next week's video. Remember, every Friday, the Seeking Wisdom Challenge will be posted on YouTube and Facebook. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, or subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and we wish you a wonderful weekend full of grace and joy.